On Easter Sunday, 1722, a Dutch admiral named Jacob Roggeveen became the first European to lay eyes on the most isolated inhabited island on Earth, a speck of volcanic rock over 1,000 miles from the nearest inhabited land, standing watch over nearly 900 massive stone statues, some over 30 feet tall. Roggeveen found a population living in modest reed huts, seemingly incapable, by European assumptions, of having built the towering stone giants surrounding them. For 250 years, that contradiction became one of the most famous mysteries in the world. By the 20th century, a very specific answer had taken hold, repeated in best-selling books and documentaries for decades. The problem is that a growing body of real archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that answer is substantially wrong. Not wrong that the statues are remarkable, they are. Wrong about who destroyed the civilization that built them and when. If real, documented mysteries hiding behind popular myths are why you're here, subscribe and turn on notifications. We go looking for the next one every week. Rapa Nui, the island's Polynesian name, was settled by Polynesian voyagers navigating open ocean by star and wave, with genetic and archaeological evidence now pointing to a settlement date around 1200 AD. The settlers found a genuinely fertile forested island and over centuries built a hierarchical society organized around competing clans, each commissioning increasingly massive moai as expressions of ancestor veneration and status. The statues were carved almost entirely at a single quarry, Rano Raraku, then transported, in some cases many miles, to stone platforms around the coastline. How a society without wheels or draft animals moved multi-ton statues was itself a mystery, until researchers Terry Hunt and Carl Lippo demonstrated through experimental archaeology that a coordinated team could actually walk a moai forward in a rocking motion, upright the whole time, matching both the physical damage patterns on transport roads and, remarkably, matching Rapa Nui oral tradition itself, which had always insisted the statues walk to their position. Earlier researchers had dismissed that as myth. It turned out to be closer to the literal truth than the imported assumption that replaced it. That pattern, an outside assumption treated as more scientific than island tradition, then overturned by rigorous testing, repeats throughout this story, most consequentially in the theory that made Easter Island globally famous. Starting in the late 20th century and reaching its widest audience through Jared Diamond's 2005 book Collapse, a specific narrative crystallized. Rapa Nui had once been covered in lush palm forest, genuinely confirmed by pollen analysis. According to the Ecocide Theory, islanders, driven by clan competition to build ever larger moai, cut down that forest at a catastrophic rate for canoes, for moving statues, for firewood and farmland. Without trees, deep-sea fishing collapsed, soil eroded, and resource competition escalated into warfare and, in the most dramatic versions, cannibalism. Population, estimated to have peaked at 15,000 or more, supposedly crashed catastrophically before Europeans ever arrived, leaving the depleted society Roggeveen found in 1722. It's a compelling narrative, and it spread widely partly because it functioned as a powerful parable about environmental self-destruction, explicitly framed by Diamond as a warning for modern industrial civilization. That moral resonance is exactly why it landed in textbooks and documentaries for decades, often stated with more certainty than the evidence actually supported. The deforestation itself isn't disputed. What's increasingly disputed, based on research accumulating since the early 2000s, is nearly every other link in the chain. That deforestation caused societal collapse, that population catastrophically crashed before contact, and that islanders were primarily responsible for destroying their own forest. The first crack in the story came from rats. Archaeologists, including Terry Hunt, found enormous quantities of rat-gnawed palm nut shells in excavated soil, in numbers suggesting Polynesian rats, stowaways in the same canoes that brought settlers, may have played a far larger role in preventing forest regeneration than deliberate human clearing did. With no natural predators and abundant seed to eat, an introduced rat population could plausibly have consumed palm seeds faster than the forest could reproduce. This doesn't erase human responsibility for clearing land and using timber, but it substantially complicates the story of reckless, singular human destruction. The second, more significant challenge concerns population collapse itself, specifically when it happened and why. The Ecocide Theory requires a catastrophic pre-1722 crash driven by internal warfare. but the evidence for large-scale pre-contact violence has turned out weaker than assumed. Obsidian tools long identified as specialized weapons have been re-examined and reinterpreted as general-purpose tools, showing wear patterns more consistent with farming and craft use than combat. Skeletal evidence hasn't produced the widespread trauma pattern you'd expect from sustained internal warfare. Instead, the evidence increasingly points somewhere else entirely, and somewhere considerably more disturbing. What happened after Roggeveen's 1722 arrival is extensively documented in written sources. Subsequent European visits introduced diseases against which the isolated population had no immunity. The same virgin soil epidemic pattern documented across the Americas and Pacific following contact more broadly. Then, in 1862, came something more direct. Peruvian ships specifically targeting Pacific islands for forced labor raided Rapa Nui, kidnapping, by documented estimates, between 1,000 and 1,500 people, a catastrophic share of an island population that may already have numbered only in the low thousands. This included a significant portion of the ruling class and knowledgeable elders, likely a major reason the island's unique Rongorongo script remains undeciphered to this day. The raids may have removed the very who could read it. International pressure eventually forced repatriation, but the returning ships became disease vectors themselves. Only a handful of the kidnapped survived long enough to make it home, in several cases bringing smallpox back and triggering further outbreaks among those who remained. Later decades brought continued disease and the confinement of the entire surviving population to a single settlement, while the rest of the island became grazing land for a sheep ranching operation. By the time reliable population figures exist in the late 19th century, the Rapa Nui population had fallen to just over 100 people. The documented causes are disease and slave raiding, occurring after European contact, not internal ecological self-destruction occurring before it. This revisionist research doesn't claim the pre-contact island was untouched. Deforestation happened, and resource pressure on a small remote island was a real challenge the islanders had to manage. What the evidence disputes is the scale, timing, and primary cause of catastrophic collapse, with newer research suggesting the pre-contact population may have been considerably smaller and more stable than Diamond's estimate, adapting to a changing landscape rather than collapsing under it, continuing to build and maintain moai right up to European contact. It's worth being honest that this remains a genuinely live academic debate, not a fully settled question. Diamond and other researchers have pushed back on parts of the revisionist case, and the exact population numbers and deforestation timeline are still argued in journals. What has shifted, even among researchers who maintain environmental pressure was real, is a broad move away from the simplest version of the story, the one where islanders alone, through their own recklessness, engineered their own destruction entirely before any outsider arrived to complicate it. What makes this worth sitting with isn't just which academic camp turns out more correct. A narrative that places total responsibility on the Rapa Nui people themselves is a fundamentally different story, with fundamentally different moral weight, than one that identifies disease and slave raiding brought by outside contact as the primary drivers of the collapse that actually occurred. The first version makes Rapa Nui a cautionary tale about human nature in the abstract. The second makes it a specific, documented history of what colonial contact did to an isolated Pacific society, a less comfortable story, and based on the accumulating evidence, a considerably more accurate. The moai are still standing, most of them facing inward across an island their builders' descendants never abandoned. Roughly 8,000 people live on Rapa Nui today, a majority of Rapa Nui descent, on land their ancestors settled 8 centuries ago and never fully lost, despite disease, kidnapping, and colonial ranching that came astonishingly close to erasing them entirely. The statues were never the real mystery. Their construction is now reasonably well understood, verified by the same experimental archaeology that recovered the walking transport method the islanders' own oral tradition had been describing accurately the whole time outsiders spent doubting it. The real story was always what happened to the people standing among those statues, and increasingly, the evidence suggests the answer has less to do with what they did to themselves, and considerably more to do with what was done to them.